So me and my roommate are really into world economics, the stock market, finance, tech, and a bunch of other nerdy shit. And we also have degrees in STEM. So we thought, why not combine all of these hobbies and skills together to create a scale or some kind of scoring system, a way to rank the countries of the world using numbers. Kind of like a World Olympics, I guess, but for stability. Wow, that's stupid. Anyway, obviously that word stability is a big trend right now as Ukraine and Russia continue to just bomb the out of each other. China builds 65 million homes with money that they don't have. And the US miraculously loses a $200 million F-35 fighter jet after the pilot ejected because it was too foggy. Whatever. The point is, the world has been really strange recently, and it had me thinking, who is the winner in all of this? As any completely normal and cool 24-year-old would do, I posed the question, and I wanted to find the answer. Introducing the Stability Index. Now, as you can imagine, this took far more time and effort than I'm willing to admit, but what's the worst case? I could be missing out on all the cool things that I usually do and all the fun that I usually have. Oh my god, that looks like so much fun. Well, with that out of the way, first things first. We broke this project down into 5 progressions, or phases, if you will. And yeah, sure, I could just show you the rankings of all the countries right now and you could see where you stack up on the list, but that's no fun. You need some context. And so, we enter phase 1. Planning. Honestly, with any large-scale project like this one, planning is probably the most important stage of the entire process, and it really came down to a reverse engineering approach. The first step being, what would the final standings look like? Would it be a scoring system based on points, percentiles, percentages? How would we normalize the data to be incorporated into this scoring system? How would the data be combined into one score? What kind of algorithm is most efficient? I think you can get a sense for just how nerdy this project was. And honestly, you probably don't give a shit about the intricacies of the mathematics and strategies that we use for our algorithm, so I'll spare you and give you a simplified version. Remember, the whole objective is to rank countries by a particular score. Let's call this score the Stability Index. Sounds pretty professional, I guess, right? Well, let's use, I don't know, Sweden as our example to better explain what this actually looks like. Sweden ended up scoring an 83.534566764. Let's call it 83.5. Spoiler, this was not the top score on the Stability Index. In fact, it sits just outside the top 10. So stick around till the end of the video to find out who received top 10 honors, because it may surprise you. Oh, and sorry to any of the Swedes out there. I know I kind of killed the anticipation for you. Well, this score is a number, with the best possible score being 100. However, no country scored 100, as that would make for quite the naive scoring system. We can say with utmost confidence that there is no perfect or utopian society out there yet, and there never has been. The most powerful and influential civilizations of history have all failed at some point, and we expect that trend to continue. Engineering a perfect societal structure is, well, impossible. We all value some aspects of society more than others. There are problems with every country in some form or fashion, whether that be related to economics, politics, government structure, culture, policy. I'm sure you could imagine the infinite factors and intertwined complexities that play a role in society's longevity. All this chit-chat to say, no country scored a 100. Likewise, no country scored below a 50. Like there is no complete perfection, there is also no complete imperfection. Every country has something going for them, even if it's harder to identify those good things in one society over another. For example, I would find it hard to give Afghanistan, a country overthrown by the Taliban, whose sole mission is to restore peace and security to the Afghan people. By partnering with terrorist organizations, committing egregious crimes against women and children, performing public executions, a better score than a country like Iceland, a country specifically known to be the most peaceful place on earth. Just look at it. So all countries on the Stability Index sit somewhere between 50 and 100. At least now we have an idea of what the end goal, what the Stability Index will look like. Well, the next obvious question is, how do we get there? How do we determine a country's score? We just talked about how many interconnected variables play a role in the success of a society. So no surprise, this would be quite the challenge. Which brings us to our next phase of the project, phase 2, engineering the scoring system. Now let's go back to our Sweden example. They scored an 83.5, but we can really break this 83.5 down into a bunch of other factors that we called categories. You will then manipulate a bunch of raw data in a way that allows for a nonlinear normalization and use a basic regression model to determine correlations between indicators in our index. Skipping all of the nerdy math you don't care about, basically we decide on 5 categories that we believe to be the most impactful in determining the success of a society. We then found measurable quantitative data, or numbers, in the form of indicators to represent each category. So for example, the quality of life category is represented by the Human Development Index, which we believe is a great way to measure exactly that, the quality of life in a country. Economics is made up of indicators like real GDP, labor force participation rate, inflation, you get the point. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the indicators we used and why for each category, because trust me, we had all these conversations in hours and hours of detail. I promise, it's just boring. Maybe I will make a follow-up video breaking down all the things we used and why. That way you'll have a great form of content to listen to while you fall asleep. Listen, I know you came here to see the rankings, but hold on, we're almost there. The indicators we used are all on the screen if you're interested. And for the few curious and cool viewers out there that do have some interest in seeing the research and numbers we used, I appreciate you a lot, and please let us know what you agree or disagree with in the comments below. We now have all the indicators in place that we need to determine Sweden's score. Like I mentioned earlier when I put up the math background and started talking really fast, each of these indicators was given a weighting and normalized on a scale of 0 to 100. So with the indicators now on a scale of 0 to 100 and the stability index on a scale of 0 to 100, it was easy. Just add up how Sweden scored in each category and you get your 83.5. But Jake, for an indicator like inflation, how do you determine what inflation rate is good or bad? And how would you allocate a score to something like that? Inflation isn't out of 100. You know, you are just so intelligent for asking that question. As you may have so vigilantly noticed, many of the indicators we used aren't just scores on a scale. Instead, we had to do our own homework on what deserves a good score versus what deserves a bad score. Continuing the inflation example, studies show that the most successful countries are usually operating in a state of mild inflation. And in short, that's because a little bit of inflation drives economic growth while keeping prices reasonable. No, we don't need to go into details on this, just trust me or look it up for yourself. So you can see how we distributed points here. 100 for 1.5 to 2.5% because that's generally in line with the Federal Reserve's mandate for maximum employment and price stability. Just think, the closer to 2, the more stable the economy. Prices are in control and the economy is growing at a steady rate. Slightly outside of that range would receive a slightly lower score. And well, if you're outside of that, you're likely facing high inflation, hyperinflation, or deflation, all which will cripple an economy over the long term. And therefore, you deserve a shitty score on the stability index. I'm sure you get the point, and I know you probably have many questions like, well, Jake, if you can't find any inflation data for a specific country, what score would you give them? Or maybe you think you could pick a far more accurate range than I could. And that's true. I'll address those points, those valid points at the end of the video. Now on screen, you can see all of the point ranges we used for each indicator. Some were more obvious than others, like anarchy scores much less than democracy does. And if you think otherwise than that, I'm sorry, you may need help. So now we know what the stability index is, we know what it's composed of, it's just a matter of execution. To be honest, this phase took way too long and I'll probably put you to sleep if I talk about it in any detail, so here is a quick summary. We first created a massive Excel spreadsheet, pasted all the raw data in their own respective sheets, used a bunch of Excel commands like VLOOKUPs and some other stuff that I had to learn on the fly, got all the raw data onto one sheet called raw dog, did some basic normalization with the process we talked about earlier, made a clean sheet, organized all the data by country, calculated the final weighted average, threw on some pretty colors with conditional formatting and filtered by score. There you have it. Execution done. A month of work, all glazed over in 20 seconds. That's upsetting. Well, anyway, that leads into phase 4. And with all the fun stuff out of the way, this is what you've been waiting for. I introduce to you the Stability Index. How did we do? Be honest. Any surprises? Well, let's go over that in phase 5, debugging and feedback. First thing you may have noticed is we only scored 77 of the 195 total countries recognized by the United Nations. Sorry, Lebanon. And this is for good reason. Remember that concern you brought up regarding not being able to find data on specific countries? Well, that's exactly the point. When trying to find reliable data for Dude, what is that sound? What is that? Sorry. When trying to find reliable data for underdeveloped or developing countries, it was quite difficult, and in some cases, there was nothing at all. And instead of potentially ruining the validity of the scale we worked so hard putting together and just giving out default scores to countries with no data, we thought it would be more effective to simply remove the countries altogether. It's kind of like when you're putting together an argument, you want to really hammer home your strongest points. If you include a bunch of little things and try to argue every single one of them, you may lose the perceived validity of your overall argument and the overall strength of your best points, even in the case all of the points are valid. Another helpful benchmark is comparing the stability index, our scale, to the HDI, or the Human Development Index. Dude, it's 4:30 in the morning. This scale is literally created by the UN, whose job is to maintain international peace and stability. So by looking at the difference in rank between our index and the HDI, you can see that our scale is relatively in agreement, which should make sense. However, here are the countries that strayed the most in agreement between our scale and the HDI. We apparently gave way too much credit to Xi Jinping in China, who ranked 60th on the HDI but was top 30 on our scale, and I break down a lot of that reason here, if you're interested. Taiwan was another, but definitely more surprising, and the world as a whole was pretty far off. I think this discrepancy can partially be explained by the fact we put a lot more emphasis on overall economic and educational factors than the HDI did. Therefore, countries like China and Taiwan scored really well in those educational and economic categories because they have a lot of smart people driving extremely large economies. But on the other hand, they do score relatively poorly in HDI metrics that focus on the individual, like income per capita. Also remember, the HDI considers 4 total indicators focusing on health, education, and standard of living, whereas the Stability Index focuses on a broader range of topics. And lastly, don't forget, the HDI makes up the entire quality of life category. I hope you can see where that discrepancy comes from. All in all, we shouldn't be too surprised to see countries like New Zealand, Netherlands, Australia, and Canada near the top. These countries literally do nothing. I never see them on the news, they're always minding their own business, and they frankly do pretty well for themselves. I'd say the definition of stable countries. Avoiding conflicts at all costs while maintaining a comfortable standard of living. Many of the Nordic countries sit in the top 25 as well. I'd say this was nearly a given. They have the lowest corruption and crime rates in the world, they have economies that are growing at a modest rate, their populations are relatively old, and robust healthcare systems are funded by the public. However, I think the one that surprised me the most was Singapore at number 1. And after doing some additional research, it's now abundantly clear why that's the case and probably always will be. But that's for another video. As we all know, hindsight is 20/20, and after getting some more time to think about and look at these results, there are definitely some things that have a serious case to be considered in the next version of the Stability Index. One metric that we would certainly like to include would be technological development. Technology has the ability to significantly improve standards of living through increased food production, worker safety and efficiency, and improved shipping and distribution networks, ample access to clean resources, etc., etc. The only challenge being quantifying that metric on a mass scale. Also, we didn't include any health-specific indicators because we felt it was sufficiently covered by the HDI, which contains life expectancy evenly weighted with the other indicators. I do, however, think there could be a case for including some sort of health metric relating to the access or relative cost of medicine. A healthier country, a healthier workforce, a healthier economy, a happier people. The point is, this isn't the end-all be-all. The Stability Index can only be improved from your suggestions and feedback. We did our best to quantify the most important aspects that determine the success of a country over the long term, but again, there's no right answer. And we only chose a total of 8 indicators to use in the algorithm despite the thousands upon thousands of potential choices. Let me know what you think of the findings and the project as a whole in the comments below. Subscribe and like if you're not lame, and if this video does get some traction, I'd love to break down the stability index in more detail, some of the philosophy behind our choices with each indicator, why Singapore sits at number 1 and probably always will, and speculate about why your country is dog shit. That's it, bye-bye now. See you later, this was fun. Good night or good morning. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.